This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Puka. Say hi, Puka.
How do?
What are we talking about today, Puka?
We're stepping into the digital web, or the digital dreaming, I guess, whatever the Changeling equivalent is of the digital web. And we're talking about online games. Joining us is special guest Fetch.
Hello, everyone. A pleasure to be here and to be elected as a representative expert of online gaming. I will try my best to give useful advice to everyone. Thank you for having me on the show again.
I think you qualify as expert. I think you run more online games and facilitate more online games than like anyone I've yet seen on Discord, so...
I'm down to running only for a week.
Oh, I think you've run possibly more online games than almost anyone I've ever met has run any games. So that's...
Well, we'll get to that. We'll get to the stories. Yeah. But yes.
So what's an online game?
Well, what isn't an online game?
In a sense, isn't Webster's Dictionary. No, to put it simply, so an online game is just, Changeling, the Dreaming, Dungeons & Dragons, whatever you want to do, but you're not meeting up in person. You're playing through some digital channel, whether it be Discord or Roll20, to have everybody be together and sharing the experience. It might be voice, it might be text, it might involve video. We'll talk about all of that later on, but basically, it's just nice when you can't or don't want to meet up with people in person to play the games that you love.
I wonder if there was ever a time that people did like party line telephone RPGs, like pre-digital.
I was thinking that to myself even as I was saying it, and don't you feel like that'd be like a great LARP? I have to feel like it happened just once at some point. Somebody did it, and that it was amazing.
Technically done that, but it was one-on-one. Yeah.
Okay, one-on-one makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, the technology for multi-person phone calls was rare before the internet. It existed, but a lot of people didn't have that at home. So
we should maybe we go over a brief history of what has evolved, then we get to talk about all the fun, juicy stuff, yeah?
Yeah. So early online gaming, like pre-worldwide... No, before then even existed. I mean, some of it continued into the 90s and some of it sort of exists today. I mean, you would have had email games, which have the problems of play-by-post with some other problems too. I don't know if anyone's continued those there, but if you have listeners, let us know if you're in one from whatever.
And more power to you.
Yeah, and fairly early on, you had, when did those start? Multi-user dungeons started
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
1975?
What?
Wow.
Yeah.
But like practically speaking, I could imagine the technology existed and was used on like a single college campus in 1975. But the 80s is when I think of.
I think what we're getting at is like, what was the first time when you would look at something and say, you know what? That is a place online where a lot of people are gathering around digitally to play a weekly game. Where did that start?
Well, weekly game. So weekly game's one type of online gaming. The other would be the MUD living world, where you'd have some kind of method of communicating. The exact technologies differed with a bunch of other people in real time, but it's just this kind of server or set of servers or place you can go online at any given time and just start role playing with people. And it could have different kinds of rules or levels of rules or that type of thing. And that's still continuing on today with various new things. But that's a very different kind of experience from, I guess, email. What we're focusing on today. Or email even. But that's like unscheduled largely. And then there's asynchronous gaming, which would be like the email forum post games, which I've tried.
See, that was my first digital foray.
Yeah.
Was the White Wolf forums.
I'm curious because I feel like one or both of you must have done online gaming before I did it. So first time I did any kind of online gaming was year of 2002. I hopped on MIRC and somehow found a person who was running, of all things, Dark Ages Inquisition LARP game, but doing it entirely through text and with kind of like not set scenes, but playing when you were playing. And
that's a interesting game for that format. That's a
yes,
and you said, "F this! I'm not trying it for another 10 years."
That is kind of what happened. That game imploded after a while, and then I came back and did a lot of in-person stuff. But like, what was before that? Like, what could you do leading up to that point?
Yeah, the first one I did was actually after I got into LARPing. Some of the LARPers got me to try this Telnet-based mush, where you would go in and it was kind of freeform, but like you could do interactive commands. If anyone's done text-based adventures, it is based around that kind of idea, and you could like.
Sure, I play visual novels.
Yeah, it was a crossover World of Darkness one, and it had like, oh, if you're a changeling, you can see if the enchanted side, and we had to like type in a command to see what the chimerical defaming would be of somebody and stuff. But there'd be like built-in, people could program in, like you could there was actually like a scripting language people could have for their character to do certain actions and things like that. And I tried it a bit and just fell flat with it, but I did play it.
Because you tried New Bremen too, right? Like
No, I'd heard of it. I was like scared of it.
Oh, okay.
But New Bremen, yeah, that was like a web-based chat, I think. That was
because I had seen New Bremen around, but I never dipped into it.
So the mush would be just like a whole bunch of people asynchronously hopping on this world and interacting with people, could see their posts. And New Bremen was kind of like that, but maybe a bit more focused in one big room.
No, New Bremen had multiple rooms too. It's a very, I would say it was just more one, you're opening up a different kind of program on your computer and connecting. Well, New Bremen was like web-based, so it was less of a technical barrier. But
see, it's interesting to me too, because I never, like, my first foray, well, really my first was AOL chat rooms. I don't know if you remember Ride In, but that was like the initial good old Red Dragon Inn. And I have to say, something on there which I don't think I've ever seen since was the kinds of like text scripts people would add. So you could do like rainbow spectrum messages and add all kinds of ASCII art to your replies. It's beautiful. But then doing the forums and the message boards, so I didn't really do muds or mushes or anything. I was very much I'm going to log in a couple times a day, review the posts, add my own, and step away. And I never had like the live scene basically unfolding when I was coming up in the world of online gaming.
Yeah. Another big thing there, which is less relevant to what we're talking about on Changing the Podcast, is in all these different online spaces of the unscheduled variety, either asynchronous posts on a forum-like thing or chat back and forth more real time, very heavily in this like freeform RP kind of thing, where it's like there's not really a setting or system and people are just role-playing. That's definitely a thing, and I'm not knocking it. It's just that's getting very far from what we're talking about. I just wanted to mention it.
Let's stick to our brief.
Yeah.
So it sounds like the history prior to what I'm most familiar with was a lot of this asynchronous or delayed. You weren't really having the whole, hey, if you're in this game, you're here on Fridays at 6 p.m.
Unscheduled, I'd say, was pretty.
Okay.
And I think part of that can be attributed to the technology of the time and the culture of the time, in the sense that a lot of people were on dial-up. So like if you were going to sit at your computer online for hours, that meant no phone calls for hours, as well as slow connections, and just people had other stuff going on. The internet wasn't like hanging out as much.
It had to be text only, because basically even if you were on a university campus with a T1 connection, which maybe could do voice, you probably wouldn't even have a microphone or whatever, like, to do it. So it was, just computers. It theoretically existed, but like so few people would have any kind of multimedia like or communicating online technology that it just wasn't a thing.
So it sounds like the first era we could really talk about would have been a time when it was not really convenient to have like a weekly storytelling game session. They tended to be more freeform and unstructured.
Yeah.
And I think the next big evolution was when fast internet connections started to become more commonplace. Yeah, and plus you started getting a lot more programs that made it easier for people to just hop in a group. Like, hey, let's do a Zoom chat. Let's do Skype.
I think Skype was probably the first one I've encountered where anybody was doing this. I know it must not have been the first. This was before it was even bought by Microsoft, but it was like the big voice and video chat program.
Yeah.
At least in my area of the people that I know, or world or whatever. There may have been others.
I mean, a lot of places. Like, I remember going to, when I was studying abroad and going to the web cafe, and there would just be like rows of people Skyping with their home country.
Yeah. So I think Skype games were the first ones I had encountered of this type, where people would trying to basically take what they would do in a tabletop game, at home or in a store or something, and then just let's turn it into an either voice and video.
Question about that then, because when I hopped into like seriously doing any form of online gaming as a part of my hobby, it was relatively recent, like about 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that was using Discord, which I really want to talk about. But to summarize, like with Discord, it is very easy to find players, create rooms, and get a game going. But what was it like looking for games that were being hosted on Zoom or Skype in days before centralized databases of games like Roll20 or the channels that double as the chat rooms like Discord is? Was it Reddit? Was it somewhere else?
RPGNet would have probably been one of the big ones back then. I mean, if you're talking specifically World of Darkness, Changeling, I think like there was some White Wolf spaces you could probably find people to. They'd have like a dedicated board or something, but you'd go on some sort of forum.
Yeah, okay.
And you would either some sort of forum or just people you knew, like people you talked to, either you'd started doing remotely just because like, well, we technically could all get together, but Wilma over there has to travel an hour, so that's going to suck. So
good old Wilma.
Right. Or like, or somebody had an in-person game and somebody moved away or whatever. But even more than finding people, I think there was a lot of trouble with tools. Like, how do you do die rolls? There was a lot of time people would just roll their dice at their table, like physically roll some dice. And then how do you do character sheets? Because it's like, are you emailing Word files? Like
you're talking about how there weren't like online character sheets. There wasn't like a cloud database to back up until we had things like Dropbox and Google Drive showed up.
Yeah. So that it was just harder. You could do it, but
you could also have things like early on. I mean, once Wikipedia kind of exploded, and then people were kind of making their own wikis for their game that they could edit in real time. That also was a useful tool.
Yeah. Another one was there was reasonably early on somebody made online die rollers, and it was like, okay, I go and create like it's like a unique URL from it, like a unique page of it that's created, and then I just pass that link to everyone else playing, and then we could all see together what the rolls were, like refresh the page and see what was rolled. So that happened reasonably early, but then the die roller had to support your games, like your dice. So like he's like, oh, this works for D&D. Not so great with a pool of D10s. We got to work on that. But
so it sounds like that era of the playing online was defined by having a lot of tools that people could use.
Yeah.
But they weren't centralized in any way. So you had to cobble things together.
They were janky, and like you might go join a new game and like nobody else had heard of this thing that you knew about that you could then suggest and be like, well, I like it this way. And then,
Discord's charm is that really it draws together a lot of those threads.
Oh, yeah.
You can have that asynchronicity and that synchronicity and the bots and everything else.
Yep.
Shall we talk about that now? Because I kind of feel like Discord and VTTs come into prominence around the same area and kind of wind up treating the same issue.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing but contempt for VTTs.
Oh boy.
They have overlapping things they treat.
If you don't mind, then I'll take a shot at it.
Yeah.
While Puka's over there seething, just staring at me with Baylor's
See,
eye.
the thing is, all of these things that I say I don't like or I'm not fond of, I still use regularly. I mean, I'm familiar with Roll20 and everything. I just don't prefer it.
I'm just teasing you. So, what we might call the modern era of online gaming is defined by two things primarily. One, Discord. Two, virtual tabletop platforms, or VTTs. I think pretty much everyone who's listening to this is going to know what Discord is, but for the uninitiated, it is a chat program. You create your own personal server to talk about whatever you want, whether that's Changeling or role-playing games in general, or some aspect of life that you're really passionate about, or cats or whatever. And you can then create channels, have separate ways of discussing things, and if you want, you can hop into a chat room and voice or even video chat with folks. You can automate things. And why this is important to online gaming is because with Discord, somebody could, say, make a server for one of their game lines or for their company as a whole, and then say, hey, if you want to play games, come play here. Or some fan could do the same thing and say, this is just where I'm going to run World of Darkness games. People hop in and they do advertisements, have their community, and when they're ready to play, they hop into chat.
And it's very flexible. I've gone and set up a Discord for a specific chronicle I'm running too. Like you could just, if you get the people together, you can then just create that. And I've done that.
There are some magical things you can do. For anybody who has ever played Alice is Missing, did you know you can play that game online? Look into Alice is Missing Discord. There is a beautiful thing that makes that work that is far too much to go into by itself. But
I thought Alice is Missing was only online.
No, technically it's meant to be you are all in a room, but you are all on your cell phones separately. Yeah, it's...
Well, it came out in 2020, so they quickly pivoted.
There's some weirdness when you play it online, but they deal with it. Yeah. And then VTTs are kind of taking the same thing, but more focused. So one everyone's heard of is Roll20. It's just a place where there's a virtual table that you can look at, where you can put down, let's be honest, dungeon maps usually. You can all the dungeon crawling. So for your Changing the Dreaming game, where you're doing the dungeon crawl through the Baylor's Thorpe, you can upload character sheets. You can do die rolls to the system. You can voice or video chat for it. You can search for games under any system you want and hop into them. Roll20 was a huge boon for gaming. It made it a lot easier for people to get together. It's also not the one I like using, but...
Yeah, but I think Roll20... it predates Discord, actually.
Yeah.
I think that's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and it had been big in gaming. I don't know what the original features were in Discord were right away, if they had die rolling capability at the very beginning. But Roll20 was already kind of there, so that kind of helped. Mm-hmm. So it's got the establishedness, and I think it worked well for D&D.
Can I explain my distaste?
Yeah.
Sure.
The issue that I have with Roll20, and I think this is just a personal thing, is that when I'm looking at a screen, and I'm absolutely somebody who relies on a small laptop screen. I don't have like multiple monitors, etc. There are so many little things to move around and keep track of and zoom in on and copy and paste and click and open and minimize and expand. And it's just, I find in my experiences, people running games on Roll20 have tended to get very caught up in the minutiae of its features. Like, obviously the maps can be beautifully designed and people craft their VTT tokens and it's a big deal. And you can have all of these windows open and everything. But fundamentally for me, that drags me away from the experience of role playing, even like the dice rolling. And I just find it personally easier to kind of engage with maybe just features one at a time rather than all at once. And I have to kind of like move my eyes around the screen to figure out where I'm going.
Roll20 is, if your game, which is probably D&D or something very similar, and you have a table with minis and maps, and you're moving things around this map with specific rules, and there's a lot of combat focus and things in the minis. That to me is what Roll20 is focused on. And if you're not doing something really in that sweet spot, that's when it...
I bet Warhammer would be good on there.
Maybe, yeah. Or something like it, yeah.
I think now is probably my time to interject.
Your time to shine.
You can hear the unruffling of my credentials as I pull them out and unfurl them. I started gaming back in 2002, played something on MIRC, didn't really care for it after a while, didn't play for a long while. Then when I got to college, found a D&D 3.5 edition game. It quickly turned into Curse of Strahd, and you can guess how that went. But
excellent.
Those folks became my friends. And although my friend circle changed over the course of the years, my excitement for gaming never did. Part of that excitement is that I love trying new games. I have no fear of popping open a new rulebook system. I want to see what's in it, and I really hope it's got something that I want to play. And I'm also perfectly fine with running one game system and then moving on to another one. And honestly, I like playing more than one game a week. I've had some weeks in my life where I've had literally one game every single day. That's probably not something you can do on your in-person games. It was a struggle for me. I had very good friends at 2018, I think it was, yeah. And they enjoyed a variety of games, but nobody really wanted to take a chance on something like, Troika. Yeah, Troika. Troika is a perfect example of a game where this is a weird game. Why would you want to play it? Well, you either vibe with it or you don't. And unfortunately, if your local play group doesn't vibe with it, that...
Yeah. I had a period where I had 6 other roommates. Most of the time, they were all role-playing gamers. We had people over all the time, and I could maybe get 3 sessions a week going on, and even then, we were not really experimenting with new games very much. So.
Yeah.
The other obvious complication is that I may want to play a lot of games, and maybe the two of you want to play games, and all 3 of us would love to play Changeling the Dreaming, but we live in different cities. In fact, I am like 12 hours ahead of the 2 of you. So not really something we can make a regular get-together by any means. I found all of this was fixed by popping online. I went in the deep end. I created an account on Discord, hung out a little bit, bought myself a microphone and a headset. And then I went to RPGNet and the servers of some games I was interested in and said, hey guys, I want to run a game for the first time. Anybody want to play with me? 5 years later, I have run somewhere shy of 80 different games digitally through Discord, Roll20, or Foundry, or some other system. Oh gosh, played about 70.
I mean, if you build it, they will game.
They will game, and that's what I found, was that running online games was a great way to find people who would want to play games that they normally could not get into. Play games as often as I want, because I could get more people. Deal with social anxiety. Some folks like myself may have an issue dealing with people in person, and it's nice to play from the comfort of your own home. Plus, also just the general convenience of, not having to drive half an hour to an hour to get to somebody's place and see how it goes. If you feel bad halfway through and you're online, a lot easier to check out.
You bring that up about social anxiety, and like my workplace habitus is coming out. We're not recording on Zoom, but I reached for the applause react button and it wasn't there. So, agreed.
Point being that online gaming is a huge convenience. Over the last 5 years, most of it has been on Discord, and I'm happy to tell you why that is and why that works for me, and why that may not work for others. Yep. It is the method I would actually recommend for all three of us here in this chat room, and pretty much anyone from the Changeling server who's listening to this episode.
Join our Discord.
Join the Discord. It's a good Discord. There's
very good Fetch's people. Discord.
And my Discord as well. We play all the games there. But here's the thing. So earlier on, listeners might have heard, so you got your maps, you got your tokens, you got your character sheets, you got your dice rolls. And honestly, in changing the dreaming, it is very rare that you need to worry about your line of sight changing every 5 feet of movement, or, the knockback effect of hitting somebody with a dragon's ire spell. Not really big deals. You don't normally need to map out the entire near dreaming Thorpe that your group has going on.
In fact, don't, as a storyteller, just don't. You will burn out and lose your mind trying to just map out everything on because there's a lot of things and they can go in all kinds of directions, and it's just
finality trigger.
Not going to work for. Yeah.
The main point being that Discord is excellent for theater of the mind games. On my server, I have a general chat, a tabletop games chat, a game recruitment chat, and then when I get a new game going, I just create a new channel for that game, and we have our out-of-character chats in there, but then we hop on to voice on the server to actually play the game. If we need to roll dice, we use a dice roll bot. If people need to refer to their character sheets, they can either just have them on hand. I like to look at them once before the game and usually never again. Or a shared character keeper, which is mostly a thing you'll see with Carl from Brindlewood games like The Between. And that is a really fancy and fun way of sharing character sheets online.
So what would you use for something like Changing the Dreaming for sharing character sheets, I guess?
For sharing character sheets, honestly, I think the easiest way is, if you really want to have an easy way of sharing them, I would say have a Google Drive for your game's materials. Give your players permission to upload it, and then tell them, please upload a version of your character sheet here, and whenever you make a significant edit to your character sheet, like just update it here. Another way is you can tell everybody, pin your character sheets. For long-term games, I'll have everybody make their own thread for their character and tell them to post their character sheet in there, and then I'll just pin it in that channel. Either of those are convenient ways for keeping hold of character sheets if you're doing a Discord and Theater of the Mind.
So you mentioned Google Drive, and we have this in our notes. This is maybe a good moment to briefly talk about sharing other kinds of materials, be it through Google Drive or elsewhere. So,
Google Drive.
First and foremost,
yes, please.
So when it comes to sharing books in particular or excerpts from books, obviously we are not going to condone piracy here on Changeling the podcast, but it does raise the question. I actually thought of this a bit earlier when you were talking about being geographically distributed. One of the other advantages of an online game is that if somebody is in a place that maybe has more or better game stores and just has more exposure to the variety of games out there, and the players you want to game with, whether they're in small towns or remote areas or whatever, and they might not have access to get the materials on their own. Maybe they can't afford to get the PDF or whatever, because now we live in the era of Kickstarters and PDFs. So when it comes to sharing the book, basically, in the way that you would pass a book around the table if you were live, I mean, online obviously facilitates that, but there are ethical considerations that we have to think about. So I don't know. I mean, what's y'all's point of view on how to handle that?
From my perspective, it's complicated, but I think the biggest thing is that you have to balance the functionality of having a game in the first place with the importance of respecting the work of the people who created the game at all.
Yeah.
My philosophy is I prefer all the players to have their own material for the game. If they don't have it, I encourage them to go out and get it. I regularly let folks know when there's...
assuming there's any legal way to buy it. I run into problems.
Yes, we are separate as discussion of what if a game is effectively abandonware. But if a game is at all available online, I encourage them to buy it, and I let them know when a discount's running on something, if one is. And those do happen all the time, especially for games like Changing the Dream. There's sales for that several times a year.
You're also much more likely to have found enough people for your game who are enthusiastic and have owned a bunch of the books and like the core book and the supplements and stuff, who are all into it and maybe just have never or not very often had a chance to play it, versus in person where you're like, hey, there's this game called Changeling, and you have to explain it to people and they're a little bit skeptical. And online, you're more likely to find people who are already invested in it too.
That's true, yeah.
The question you're really getting at is like, what happens when you run into a situation where it's like, hey guys, I want to run Don't Rest Your Head, time to play. And then everyone goes, what's Don't Rest Your Head? And you explain to them and they're like, that sounds great. What are the rules for it? So there's...
Just straighten your head. The advantage there is it's $5 US for a copy, so digital copy.
I did not know that one was that cheap. That is a fantastic price for that. But the point is that understandably, people are going to have buyer's hesitancy when it comes to just like, buy this full $5, $10, $15, $20, $25, $30 PDF for a game that maybe the GM has never run before and which you might run only once. Kind of a big ask for some folks, understandably. Under those circumstances, my first suggestion is, as always, if they don't have the financial means to do that, they should look to see if there's a deal going on or if there is a quick start version available of the game, or even whether community copies may be available. That's a thing for games on itch.io. Sometimes the developers will say, the game is $15, but if you can't afford $15, here, just take one of these copies for free. It's fine.
Yeah, lots of games do have free bits too, besides just quick starts. Like there might be an SRD for some of them. They might have, just a lot of Powered by the Apocalypse games. You can get just getting the character sheets, which you can get for free from their website, will often be enough to play, not run, but to play the games. So.
Or if it's available, tell them to watch an actual play.
If there's something which players can't get access to that's important, it can be helpful to create excerpts from the game for them to review without just giving them the entire manual. If you're getting into a situation where you would have to give an entire manual to a game group, then it gets dicier. And the rules for approaching this in a private game versus a public game might be different. I have actually gone before to two different companies and said, in one case I was live streaming the game and said, hey, is it okay if I share a copy of your rule book with the rest of my table? And they just said, yeah, sure. No, that makes perfect sense.
Oh, yeah.
I do know there are creators too have just said, like, especially if you do something like they would be okay, and it depends on the creator, but some of them have on record said, like, if you share it limited with them on a drive read only, and then you'd take it down when the game's done, they'd be fine with that. So it's
for streaming too, it's free advertising for them. So there is a baked in advantage.
I think the general cultural thing behind it, and I'm not like a major game developer, so I don't claim to actually speak for anyone else, but the vibe I've picked up is, as long as you're keeping something private to your group, and they're not sharing it elsewhere, nobody's really going to care that much about sharing books. But it is still best etiquette that you encourage players to find their own resources, and if they cannot, then to provide what is necessary, but within as limited a field as you can.
And depending on your own financial circumstances, and if you're, say, running a game for a friend of yours or something, there are ways to just buy them a copy if it's not too much, if you have the money. And
Sure, you can give people copies of games through DriveThruRPG.
Which, it should be pointed out, is also a joint venture with Roll20 at this point.
So is Discord in a way.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, just on the subject of the etiquette of it, I would also say You mentioned the major developers. In particular, when it comes to small independent creators or homebrewers, I always feel like, please support them. Please, please, please. And I say that as one and as someone who values that kind of material. That's material that is made purely out of love for the game. And like, I think that's certainly worthy of chipping in a few dollars.
I too, having recently become a self-published game developer, I'm like, if somebody wanted to just share copies of my game for their home group, I'm personally fine with that. I get it. Just, don't go
Times are hard.
posting it on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I mean, the only other thing I'll say on the matter is rest in peace, the Trove, and fuck capitalism. But moving on.
So the other thing you can do is VTTs. So VTTs are when you can get your fancy. Do you want to have, music streaming through it and the dice roller and the voice in the chat, and you've got the map and you've got the character sheets right there inside of the program, and you've got journals that people can access? Do you want to have character tokens sitting right there, watch the dice literally rolling in front of you, and watch the character move around and see their health track go down, and watch as their tokens only has like a big death symbol on it? Oh, that's so cool. You can't do that on Discord.
The level of intensity with which you said all that is immediately why I'm like, no, I'm not doing VTTs.
You generally do not need a VTT. I will mention, for the sake of completion, that both Roll20 and Foundry people have made changing the dreaming character sheets. So you could pop in through either of those systems and run Changeling the Dreaming.
Do you have to separately buy those?
I believe they're just fan stuff, and they technically don't contain anything proprietary, so they avoid that.
They're just like Mr. Gone, but VTT. Yeah,
basically. And the thing is, that is such a dry experience composed to what you would get if you were like, I'm going to buy this module for Forgotten Realms, that I do feel like it's overkill.
My understanding for VTTs, at least for Roll20 too, though, is that the things like the character sheet stuff, like because you can't actually easily modify or add your own. I know people have complained about, we're forced to use the vampire character sheet for a Changeling game on Roll20 because that's what's available. So I haven't looked into it enough, but is that...
I checked just before the show. I saw one had been...
Okay.
Or two of them, technically, but I don't know how good either one of them actually is. I would personally suggest Changing the Dreaming. It's simple enough. Just use Discord. It'll save you a headache.
So if you're using Discord, what methods would you find for like tracking like willpower expenditure and glamour and temporary banality and that kind of thing?
Players keep their character sheets open during the course of the session, and whenever they would mark something on the sheet, they just mark it on the sheet.
Okay.
And then you don't usually need something for something more communal. Sometimes there is something. For example, with Exalted, there is a special website called Lotcasting Atemi.
Ooh.
Yep, get this. So groups can... Storyteller creates a campaign. They can add sets for all of their characters on it. The players can make the characters themselves, import them into the campaign with a press of like 2 buttons. And then there is a combat button you press, and Lotcasting Atemi will automate everything you do short of rolling the actual dice themselves.
Like it runs through the steps, and oh my goodness.
Yeah, it runs through the steps and characters' turns, and it looks at their stats when you're doing things. For example, because it connects to your character sheet, and you can take actions on it in combat through the sheet, it'll say like, oh, I spend the equivalent of like 5 glamour. Then a character sheet will say, oh, new condition pops up. Your character goes bonfire and crazy iconic anima effects happen, because that's what happens. So some more advanced automation does exist for character sheets, but not really for Changeling, and typically not necessary.
Changeling doesn't need it as much. It just needs those temporary expenditures and health tracks, and that's about it, I think.
Yeah.
But if you want to play any version of the Warhammer role-playing game, or if you want to play any kind of D&D or a lot of the D&D Heartbreakers, at that point it's usually worth considering a VTT, because the combination features can make the game a lot easier to run. It can also be useful if you are either the kind of person who absolutely loves maps for scene setting and is willing to go through the work of doing that, or if you're going to have one location, like if your entire Changeling game takes place inside of a school that the Changelings have a weirdly hard time leaving, then you could, continue to build upon that. But really save the VTTs for your more complex games.
Especially when that complexity is necessary and not elective.
Correct, yes. In Changing the Dreaming, it's okay sometimes to just roll a few d10s and see if you got a 6 or higher on at least one.
And listen, I love maps as much as the next person, but there's a level of fiddliness that I don't need to. I have enough going on as a storyteller.
And I mean, you can share maps still, which is like on Discord.
Oh, yeah, of course.
If you're not doing like moving the 5-foot step, but you're just like,
right.
Here's what the like I've done. It's like, here's a layout I like downloaded from some McMansion, and I'm like, this is what the freehold looks like.
Or God's help you have to calculate a cone.
No, yeah, but like you can just on Discord or Google Drive or whatever, you can drop in like pictures of things and maps of things there, and for changeling purposes I think that's fine.
Yeah.
Degree calculation, the missing changeling art.
Yeah.
I want to also briefly mention streaming. I don't know if either of you have done much video streaming. I was actually in 2 whole streaming games over lockdown, so I do have some familiarity with it, but I know Fetch, you had mentioned green screens and webcams as tools.
Yeah, so I can kind of break this down into 3 different formats for how people play their games. I guess I'll start with what I'm most familiar with and what I think most people do nowadays for theater of the mind games, like Changing the Dreaming. And that is play once a week through voice on Discord. Some people might use Zoom or another method. And that's kind of it for that. You meet up again next week and do the same thing, purely through voice. Some games will add in video. And when they do that, that enables people to be on camera while they're on voice. Being able to see somebody else's expressions is just one of those human things that puts people at ease and makes it easier to communicate things.
Yeah. Some things, like we're talking about social anxiety too. I do know some people have a lot of that around video. So
that gets into the reasons some folks might not want to do that, or even, as I found, to be hesitant to do voice games at all. Having yourself heard, to say nothing of being seen, can give people anxiety. Take an easy example. I'm a trans girl, and so I have lots of feelings about the sound of my voice and my appearance. I happen to be okay with being on voice or with even showing my appearance on camera, but some part of me always has a bit of anxiety about that. And I perfectly understand anyone else with a similar background who would not feel comfortable showing either aspect of themselves online, or even people who just don't feel comfortable doing it, and that's their business. It can be as simple as, I just don't like being on camera. I don't like hearing the sound of my voice. Or I've had people who prefer text because they have a hearing impairment. So
guilty.
Yep, there you go. It doesn't work at all. So a question comes up of, how do you handle that? And I have done it all. I have done pure text. I have done pure voice. I've done voice and video. I have done voice, video, and streamed.
Well, from my perspective, I was saying before, like, to me, the operative thing is whether I know the people or not. And I mean, when I did streaming games over lockdown, one of them was with people I knew very well. One was complete strangers, but we at least had a couple sessions 0 and met each other. And ultimately, the audience sizes, I don't think ever passed like 20. So it wasn't that much anxiety. But it is still, like you're saying, physiologically, almost instinctively, we hold ourselves differently and react differently when we see our own faces, we see other people looking at us, and that impacts or can impact your attempt to embody the character or to get into that headspace. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're just there to roll dice and chit chat, maybe it doesn't matter so much. But if you're actually trying to narrate a scene and speak in the voice of a character, especially as a storyteller, that's a lot of heavy lifting for your brain to do. And interestingly, I think I actually prefer video to voice for that, because video, at least you do get some of those nonverbal cues. And if I'm doing voice only with people I don't know and there's lag and whatnot, then it's really difficult for me, especially as someone with limited hearing, to kind of know when I can speak and when I should hold back and do all that. Even this recording is like, I'm a little bit, you're both very wonderful and I enjoy talking with you, so it's easier. But I have that hesitation around, I hope I'm not interrupting. I hope I can jump in here. And carrying that over to the experience of actually gaming, that can be a lot.
Yep.
I find, speaking as a facilitator, a game master, it's always good to ask folks what accommodations they need,
yes.
but they bring something up. So, like, if you were in a game with me, I would ask, do you need anything for me to approach this? Is it helpful if I write out explanations or if I do summaries, something like that? Or in some cases, just do text game. I have a good friend of mine who had never played any TTRPG at all. And then about 6 months ago, I convinced them, hey, join my server. I promise I'll run a text-only game for them. And we had a lovely text-only game of Golden Sky Stories.
Do you have any other text-only games coming up?
I could be convinced to run some more text-only games. I see the growing demand for them. But that does bring me to a thing I love, which either of you or some of our listeners may really enjoy. And that's the concept of text-based side scenes. So when I run a game, there tends to be, over the course of time, I don't really have an endpoint in mind for my campaign. I just keep telling stories until I get bored. And I've been running Beast the Primordial for 1.5 years, and I keep having stories to tell. So now I have a cast of over 100 characters and have to use a plot point map to keep track of them for people who join. And a lot of players get really excited about the drama and the little characters and the moments they didn't get to finish. Like, a potential love interest shows up in a story, or one of the PCs mentions how their contact is, and I swear to you, this is a literal game in Chronicles of Darkness. Count fucking Dracula is his proper name, and you can Google it and you can find it for free. His character sheet, freely provided from Onyx Path. First, like, can I just have a scene with that character? And things like this may not fit neatly into a 2 to 4 hour session, especially if people, tend to meander. So for things that involve one character or get really in depth about something, I give my players the opportunity to do text-based side scenes. So in that case, a player or myself will just create a scene. So I'll say, for example, at the end of the last session, you had returned to the empty throne of the oak. And there you found the steward. The steward had been waiting for you for centuries and has gone deeply into bedlam. You were able to prevent the steward from doing anything terrible to you, but now they're no longer immediately relevant to the story, but they're still there. You have feelings about their existence because your past incarnation ruled the empty throne. Well, having a good hour-long chat with the steward may not be an exciting thing for the other 3, 4, or even 5 players at the table. You can handle that by just having a side scene where you resolve that. I do recommend that you keep side scenes in a public area so that other folks are able to see it and keep track of it throughout the course of the week. Especially if it's a side scene that happens to be between 2 PCs, so the storyteller can see it. If you feel like there is a side scene you want to have that's either you're just uncomfortable sharing a side scene in public, or you want to do more mature content and you're not sure how the group feels about that being visible even in side scenes, talk with your group about how to handle it. I have definitely helped out players with feeling comfortable doing with those and engaging them. And keep in mind, some players, they don't have the time or interest to do a side scene. So if any of you are sitting there going like, that's amazing, that's like so much more role playing, be sure you let your players know if you want that to be a major aspect of your game.
Well said.
We were talking a little bit earlier about some of the stuff with audio and things people might have issues with it. I've had a different set of issues with it, and I found some things that have helped me. I don't want to bring some of that up. For me personally, especially if it's a longer running game, anything past 2 hours, I definitely want to, like, every hour, for me, I need to take like a 10-minute break of just no screen, walk away, no headphones on, whatever. I've found people using microphones with earbuds or headphones. You can use fairly low end equipment. It's fine for it. You don't need like the best audio quality. You just need something where the speaker on your computer is not blasting out what everyone else is saying. If everyone can do that who's in the game, that helps so much. And also something to handle. This is a problem in person, but it's even more of a problem online, where it's really hard to know when somebody can interject. There's a bit of lag, there's less of the cues. So either having a mechanism where somebody can like raise their hand essentially in whatever tool you're using, or something that everyone can see really quickly and be like, oh no, this person interjects, especially when it's like a multi-person scene and there's like, well, I'm taking an action kind of thing. Or the storyteller being very diligent about it, going through everybody.
I have actually had that with a couple of players. One of them has a hearing disability, and the other one is instinctively aggravated whenever they get interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And to handle things like that, I think it's important that if you do have a situation where something like that, where you have an impairment or something triggers you like that, by all means, please do mention that during the session zero so the storyteller can adjust around that.
Yeah. It can also be people just don't want to interrupt. That can be it too. Or it's hard to know how to, like, you don't want to do it mid-sentence of somebody else and then...
I'll give you guys a tip I use when I'm really struggling with the tempo of it. I will, as a storyteller, pause and count for a full second before I say something, because that is a pretty good indicator that somebody has gotten out their thoughts. I'll shorten it to half a second if I'm still not sure, but I feel like the scene needs to start progressing or I'm feeling more confident in myself. But I find that helps you get a rhythm for not talking over folks.
Yeah, that thing with the break is just so important for me for that. I just wanted to bring that up. It was like a revelation. It's like, I can do online gaming now.
I do think taking a break is good both in and out of person. But I also think it's when you're doing an online game, the important thing is you should still be taking breaks. And if you as a player need to step away, please, please, please tell the group if you're stepping away during a scene your character is in, or if you're going to be away for an extended period of time. Be sure you keep a good lookout for whether you are muted. You do not want to be in a situation where, the GM says, so, sitting back upon your throne, your traitorous second in command before you now, different yet so similar to the person you once know. You hold the silver sword of trust in your hand, and their head is knelt before you. You have a decision to make, and what you do now will be the truth. For this world and the dreaming, what do you do? And then after 15 seconds, you realize that they were out feeding the dog. I have no idea you said anything.
Yeah. Another, which before I started doing online games, I would have thought it needed to be said, but I think it needs to be said. If you're playing in the game or running whatever, try not to be in a room where there's people in the background chatting with each other.
Or playing video games. Oh, Lord.
Or anything like that. Yeah, that's just... I know some spaces are too small and stuff, but like it really just...
I'm going to seize the opportunity for a segue because I think it's important to point out a lot of these things. I get the sense sometimes people, I think, comprehend pretty easily that being a storyteller in the flesh, it takes a lot of management. Like you're doing a lot of things. You're kind of the point of direction for all of your players. And I suspect sometimes people go into an online game thinking it's somehow going to be easier when it's not. It's just you have a different set of lots of things to manage. So we've covered a lot of the items I have on my considerations for storytellers list. But from your perspective, for both of you, what are some of the things about online games that are unique to the storyteller management side? Like, obviously, something like making sure you're not muted is something you don't probably have to worry about when you're gaming around a table. But when it comes to like making sure your players are engaged in the scene, even if they're not in the spotlight, it's harder to do that if you can't see their face, for example. So what strategies do you use to kind of address those things?
There's some things that I'm surprised aren't easier online than I was expecting. Like attendance. Like the people showing...
Yeah.
Like it's just as likely somebody will just say they're going to come to your game and just not show up online, even if you know them, as it is in person. I don't know why. Like they don't give you a heads up. Players, please just have a system where people can message each other. I'm pretty sure anybody who's going to be doing an online game probably has a cell phone. Put something on it so that you can message the storyteller saying, I'm not going to be able to make it or I'm going to be late. Like that would be great.
Yeah.
And then actually do that.
You're getting into the kind of thing one of the big things I want to talk about, which is player management. Yeah, it's actually kind of a challenge with online games because you have more of an opportunity to engage the players, but also more of a need to engage the players.
And I find it is in general the thing that's harder online, I've found, than in person is just the social
niceties.
Yeah, people are less likely to be aware or conscientious. It's not intentional, but like if they're going on way too long or they're doing something that's upset someone else or whatever, like they're just less aware of it. In person, there's more... I mean, it depends on the person. There's probably people for whom it's about the same, but in general, on average, it's more likely to come up, I think. And you need to make more proactive.
Yeah, definitely being proactive. So here's what I do when I am getting a game together. I create a channel. I create a role on my Discord server for the people. I send everybody a post using Hammer Time. Do not let me forget to talk about that if I talk about anything today. I make a post using Hammer Time saying exactly when our session 0 is going to be. I lay out in text for everybody, here's where you can find the game materials or share anything that you need to share. Here's how to create channels for your threads for your characters so that you can talk about them. Here's what I want from you between now and the start of the week. Here's what I want you guys to talk with each other about. I check in on people every 48 hours if I've done like a post to somebody about something and they haven't replied. Then I'm checking in with them to be like, how's the character coming along? Because I don't want to start a session and they're just completely a no-show or show up and like, oh, I totally forgot I didn't get any of the first 3 notifications.
All right, I'll be the one to ask. What is Hammer Time?
Good question. So have you ever put down something and said, so guys, I could do the game like 7 p.m. Pacific, and then someone says, I'm sorry, I can't really play until like 5, or what is that in Eastern? And you just realize that nobody knows what you're talking about. Or, God forbid, you happen to be living in Thailand, and 14 hours ahead of where you used to live, and everybody else in the world is still using daylight savings except for you, and you need to consider games that are going to be starting after daylight savings. Oh boy. Having a way of just sharing a time and knowing that everybody sees the right time is a blessing that you really need. hammertime.cyu is a website where you input a date and a time, and it creates Discord embeds. If you copy that embed into and paste it into Discord, then the embed will show up in the corresponding local time for a person. So if I say session 0 is going to be 10 a.m. on Saturday, that's for me living in Thailand. But somebody is living in United States of America, Central Time Zone. What they're going to see is, because they're 12 hours behind me, they're going to see, oh, the game is the day before that at 10 p.m. It's showing their local time. It makes things so much easier to schedule.
There are also bots that do that, but yeah, in general, I think just copying and pasting from the website's easier. But
the link will be provided in the show notes to this episode.
So other like culture and practice things to keep in mind: send regular reminders to your players. Do try to be engaging online if you're the person who's running the game, because if you don't have your players' engagement throughout the course of the week, sometimes it can be hard to keep the game going. If you're a player, please do not mute notifications from your storyteller, because it will make it harder for them to communicate important things, such as, hey guys, next game session's canceled.
To your point about the surprise of people canceling, Josh, like even when it's an online game.
No, not canceling.
Or not showing up,
not showing up, yeah. Canceling I can deal with. I understand.
Yeah. But in relation to what I was saying about people having the idea that online games are somehow less work to storytell or run, I think players sometimes have the idea that online games are less important. From the player side, if you think it's less work to run, then you think it's less of a big deal maybe to not show up. You're like, oh, it's just an online game. So I would urge from the player side to, treat it the same way as you would a game that you're going to have to actually put on pants, get in the car or whatever, and go to somebody's house for several hours to sit and game. Give it that same weight. Because I think the engagement is two-way, So the storyteller might have all of these tools at their disposal and ways that they can keep players engaged during downtime, etc. And the players have to be willing to engage with that. Even before you do the session 0, when you're actually putting the call out there, I don't know exactly how I would phrase it necessarily, but if I were to put out an ad for a game, I would try to have some kind of sieve to decide who's worthy of inclusion, but who's actually going to put in that effort.
Oh boy.
It's tough, for sure.
So that is a topic worthy of itself.
Join us for the upcoming etiquette episode.
Yes, the upcoming etiquette episode. I really should give some quick tips for people who are actually like running and playing a game online for the first time, especially, the target audience of this, Discord changeling players. If you guys don't mind, I'll give a quick rundown of some basic things for how a session should progress.
Go for it.
Cool. I recommend that day before for your first session, send a reminder to the group. Morning you wake up, send a reminder to the group. Hour before the game, send a reminder to the group. Do another one a few minutes before the game starts, and then one once the game is actually there. You can get less aggressive about it as your games continue, but you want to make sure that you know people will be showing up and that they remember the actual time for it. The idea is hop into voice chat first if you're the storyteller. If the storyteller is not there, it's okay to not hop in. It's also okay to hop in. Be aware, if I'm your storyteller and you've hopped in 30 minutes early, I'm going to feel compelled to hop in out of social anxiety to see, what's up? Do you need me? I understand that people are going to sometimes have technical issues at the start or forget. That happens in real life too. My advice is this: if a player doesn't say that they're not going to show up for your game, check to see if they're online when the game time starts. Start sending them pings. Let's say ping them like 5 minutes after, 10 minutes after. If you don't have everybody by 15 minutes in, begin with who you have. Honestly, I have had so many games where somebody shows up 45 minutes into the session and says, "Oh my god, I set my alarm for an hour after the game starts. I am so sorry." When you get into it, I recommend have everybody update their in-server profiles. You can change your profile name for just the server that you are on. So, like, I could change mine from being Fetch to being Cherry Pepper, the name of my Puka childling, and then put in parentheses Fetch. It makes it easier for players to call you by the right name because they will often be looking at that chat handle. Also, if you're stuck on order for who to speak with, good etiquette is to go down the list of players based upon the names that show up in the screen. Be prepared to deal with technical issues as soon as they become a problem. If I hear something buzzing in the background from one player, I will DM them on the side and hope they get it. And then I will let them know during the break or beforehand if necessary if the issue persists. If this is your first time playing a game, please test your audio and, if necessary, video equipment before actually getting into the game session. There is nothing quite like showing up to a game session, realizing that nobody else can hear you over the sound behind you, or that you signed up for a streamed video game, but you are glitching out and losing your connection every time you do that. Especially when you don't have video, you can't always tell people's faces, so make extra sure that you're taking those breaks and paying attention to your own sense of story pacing for when you are going to call a session. Just like in person, a lot of people will very kindly sit there very patiently, even when they are very tired, and say nothing at all for far too long. Other than that, try to generally handle it like you would a normal session. Keep in mind that you have extra tools. If you're doing things on Discord and somebody says, "Hey, remind me, where are the game books?" you can refer them to your pins. Did you come up with some important set like house rule you want to, or a new changeling art or merit that you wrote down? Pin it. Let people use those resources. Enjoy your time using the games online. Yes, you are losing something by not having everybody there in person, but you are still having a fantastic game. And I can tell you, as someone who's, again, done between playing and running over 100 games in the last 5 years, it's a wonderful experience. I would not have met my fiance or moved halfway across the world if I had not stepped out of my in-person bubble and started running games online.
Huzzah! That gets a huzzah, I feel.
Thank you.
But yeah, all of that, 100% agreed. And I mean, having been responsible for many of those things myself, and then also like grinding my teeth in frustration when other people have been responsible for those, it can happen to us all. There's no shame in it. Just be prepared for it and be willing to address it immediately.
And if you're doing this for the first time and you're nervous, it is okay to take your favorite game and run a one-shot.
Perfectly acceptable. Something else I wanted to briefly throw in as well is, because I think sometimes, especially if you're in the middle of a scene and something's happening and you're like, wait, I don't remember that from the book, or I don't know what rule that is, and you don't want to interrupt the flow to like confirm a mechanic or make sure you've gotten something right or whatever. Remember that if you're online, you have discussion spaces available. If you have a chat room open on the side, you can maybe just like quickly message other players who aren't the focus of the scene and say, hey, can anyone clarify what just happened? And someone with more information may be happy to jump in and help. You have resources like, for Changeling, there's the White Wolf Wiki. Players help each other, take some of the burden off the storyteller, particularly if you're in that real-time space that is mediated away from being face-to-face, and use the resources at your disposal.
I've had times when I've posted on, I think, like my general tabletop discussion channel, or maybe even the Changing the Podcast channel, despite having the game on my own server, just being like, does anybody know the answer to this question? And having somebody being able to be like, well, if you go to Time of Judgment and check this out, that's where you can find this picture of this character. Like, oh, thank you.
That being said, I have to just gripe about one tiny thing, which is like, all right, yes, Changeling has a lot of holes in it. Any game system has a lot of holes in it. That's why homebrew exists. But something that I often see people doing is presenting what they've done in their game as canon. And I think that that is disingenuous, because then if you do that for a player and you don't present it with, you know, a big exclamation point that says, this is not what the book says, this is what I'm saying, then that player in the future games might present that to other players who haven't played it before and say, oh yeah, this is how you do it. And it's like, don't disrupt without any kind of editorial around it the actual rules of the game, because that will just ultimately disservice players.
That's been going on like even not online with Changeling.
Oh yeah, of course.
It's like some storyteller created it, and then like a chain of 5 games later with different storytellers. It's like this house rule everyone thinks is canon. Like,
and in a way, that's beautiful. That's the nature of community. That's the nature of people making the game their own. But particularly when you try to transition that into teaching people how to play the game, if they read the book expecting something and they get something else, they're going to be like, wait, what? So
I proposed an episode of the podcast entirely about which dramatic systems each of the 20th anniversary game lines considers optional.
Season 4.
Including botching, which is sometimes optional and sometimes not.
Yeah, or Wraith that just doesn't have merits and flaws.
Oh.
Yeah, who needs them? Oh gosh, one last thing we should probably talk about before we wrap up. Paid gaming, right?
Yeah.
That's the thing which is primarily an online thing. Yeah. I have not run any paid games myself yet. I've been too busy running new games that even I have not played to be...
You've been too busy running unpaid games.
I have a lot of experience running unpaid games, in part because I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to like this after the first session. I don't know what I'm running. I don't know what this is. This is Electric Bastion Land. It's all vibes. But in all seriousness, there is a community for paid gaming. It, at its best, is a community which has experienced storytellers who have really made it their job to run a quality game and to share that with the world, and they just believe that there's enough demand that they can charge for a game, and they are correct. There are plenty of games out there that people will pay to be a part of because they are just not available for free, unless I'm running it, because I'm the only one who will run those super weird games for free. Paid for gaming, remember, anybody can run a paid online game. Start Playing has some rules and regulations that weed out some of the more problematic storytellers.
Do they?
I'm pretty sure they have like a rule like saying like you have to have safety tools at least, if nothing else.
Oh, that's good to know.
I'm kind of curious now to check on that in more detail later on. But for the sake of time for now, I've heard that they have things requiring like safety tools. Like one of my friends who was starting paid GMing was asking for reviews from people who have played with Fair because they wanted to show potential new players what she was capable of doing, what other people thought. But you can wind up with somebody who's just running, the most basic of D&D modules, and they're like, give me $20 a week to play this module with me.
Right.
And some are fantastic, some are not. It's going to depend. As for from a GM perspective, I am, again, speaking to someone who has not done paid for GMing yet. It is something that I would eventually be interested in doing. But I think the worst reason to get into paid GMing would be also the worst reason to become a TTRPG developer, which is for the money.
Yeah.
Yes.
You're not going to make it. It's not going to happen.
I know somebody who does paid GMing as his full-time job, and I think he's running 2 games a day every day. at like $20 a pop per player with 4 or 5 players per game session, 4 hours per game session. So,
well, and not to cast aspersions on this person, but what is the quality of those games would be my immediate question, because all of the prep time that I think a game needs, like if I were a player entering into that, I would be very hesitant, because it's like I put in many more hours to prepare for a session than the session itself. So someone who's doing that many sessions, I would think, well, they're not going to be the quality I want.
Especially with maybe the type of person who'd want to pay for a game might expect a lot of
right
too. Yeah.
I think that's a fair concern. From my limited experience playing with them and the occasional freebies they've offered, the games themselves have been fine. But
Maybe
yes,
they're the exception.
yes, they, from my personal experience with them, seem like they're passionate about the hobby itself. But, for them it has worked out, and that is great. But I've also seen someone who's doing it because they really need money, or they think it'll make people take their game more seriously. And that's not a good way of doing it, because that's only going to stress you out and probably make you burn out of your game faster than you otherwise would have, if you would have at all.
Yeah, I do have the what if I suddenly became rich fantasy of paying people to be in my game and actually show up and treat it seriously. That's different.
I'll happily be paid to be a player, for sure.
Paid players, the next evolution.
I mean, that's more the streaming dream, right? To be like Critical Role and have a salary for streaming as a player.
Yep.
Yes.
That's a whole other, though, like streaming for,
yeah,
especially something that audience focused. That's a very different.
That's season 4. Yeah. We'll talk about it then.
We did do an interview with a Changeling streaming group, but
they were absolutely not in it for the money.
That's true. Yeah.
Or even the adulation, I would say. I mean, I think
they were that hot, all that like troves of Changing the Dreaming money out there. That's just an untapped market.
Untapped. So online gaming, it's fun. It's worth a shot. Please give it a try. Run a one-shot, play in a one-shot, see what you feel. If it doesn't work for you, okay. But if it does, it can open a wide range of people and games that you otherwise never would have experienced, and make your life all the richer for it.
Yeah, there were the questions, comments. There's one comment.
Oh, there were? Okay, let's hear them.
Yeah. There's one. Well, most of it we've addressed, but Atlas48 said Roll20's Changeling sheet is borderline unusable and still contain VTM's path system on its character sheets and forced me to switch to Foundry for my games. I just wanted to bring that up as
That's, I think, what I was thinking of when it comes to the difficulty of using kind of like preloaded, not very customizable VTTs.
Like if you happen to be on Roll20 already and you want to take a look at the sheet and you're thinking of using it, look at the sheet first before. Maybe there's been a change, but very recently. But
I think this ties into a bigger point, which is online gaming oftentimes depends upon using a lot of tools. And if one of those tools fails, then you miss a critical aspect of your game, or you don't have a game session, period. So always check everything. Can you load the PDF for your character sheet? Can you access the Google Drive the GM is sharing? Can people hear you on a microphone when you join the chat? Can you see the VTT in Roll20? Have you actually downloaded the program you need for running the music? It's like something like Sirenscape. Yeah.
Can I throw in one quick thing about music? We didn't really talk about it, but Puka's tip for music: have a randomizable playlist or whatever ambient thing that lives somewhere not in your main space where you're doing the actual gaming, whether it's a separate bot or a YouTube playlist or whatever, and give players the ability to not only mute it at will, but adjust the volume at will. This is different than if you're streaming and you need to have like a song for the fight scene or whatever, but because music is something that people find anything from very beneficial to extremely disruptive.
I was about to object, and then you're like, "Oh, I can mute it. Okay, I'll just mute it on any game I play in," because I could not handle music.
Yeah.
While
And I mean,
playing.
I like having it very, very soft in the background. That's my preference. And other people like it loud, so...
I like to recommend music to folks. Join my Spotify jam.
There you go.
I also forget to do that all the time, so...
It's maybe the least essential piece for most players.
Yeah, and also, at some point, we can tell this even from our podcasting, some sort of weird disruption will happen at some point in your chronicle if you're running an ongoing game. One of your sessions, things will go weird.
Bear in mind also for streaming, there's a lot of weird licensing stuff around it, especially on Twitch, especially recently. So, but there are bots for it.
I think that ties into a bigger thing, which is keep in mind whether the online game you're doing is public versus private. There's going to be different community expectations about what kinds of games are appropriate to run in public, how it's appropriate to conduct yourself, and the like.
And there's a difference between public live and public recorded to be viewed later by anybody.
For sure.
But Season 4. Okay.
So, Fetch, if they want to contact you or maybe check out that Discord of yours or
join one of the many, many games.
My many, many games. I just finished a game of running Castlevania for folks.
Ooh.
Yep, generational game. As you keep dealing with it coming back again and again, and your PCs can turn into the villain. Absolutely loved it. So, a few places you can find me. I am on Blue Sky as Amelia Fetch. AMELIAFETCH. That is where I most typically post. I do not use the other posting platform because, well, you know.
Yeah.
You can also find me on my Discord server, which I don't have a custom link for, so I'll have to post one for that one. But I think it's also pinned in the Changeling Discord. If you do join it, come say hello and be ready to play games. I run a lot of them. If you go to ameliafetch.itch.io, you can find the two games that I have made. One is a game about trans paladins fighting a necromancer who weaponizes dead names. The game is called The Necromancer. I've run a one-shot of it, had a delightful time, made it in like 24 hours, and I want to do more with it. The other game, which I'm desperate to run, is basically What If Golden Sky Stories, but with robots, but also not Engine Sky. It's called Do Androids Run on Electric Spoons? And it is a game of social anxiety where you are androids that have gained full sentience and have a desperate need to socialize with human, but it runs out your literal battery. Figure out how to navigate problems and make friends, knowing that you will just definitely shut down at some point if you keep pushing yourself. Both games are available for pay what you want on itch.io. Choosing to leave a review for them, let me know what you think, or buying them is going to only encourage me to make more games like this.
And links to these will be included in the show notes along with, Josh, other stuff?
Well, yeah, so our podcast website, changelingthepodcast.com. You can send us a toot on Mastodon, changelingpod@dice.camp. You can join our Discord as well, discord.me/CTP. You can email us, podcast@changelingthepodcast.com. We're on we have a Facebook page for Changeling the Podcast. We have a YouTube. Watch it or listen to us on YouTube Music for Changeling the Podcast. And we have Patreon, Changeling the Podcast, if you want to give us some bit of money to help us keep going. And that's it, I think.
Even if it's not, links to these will also be in the show notes.
Yeah. And once again, I'm Josh.
I remain the Puka.
And I've been Fetch.
And someone really needs to do a digital Changeling the Dreaming Storyteller Vault product. I really want to see that.
The Dreaming is just a series of tubes.
We're talking a lot about Season 4 in this episode, as this will likely be our last full-length release before the Winter Regnum. In addition to online etiquette and streaming for success like Critical Role, we're considering an entire expanded slate of online game-themed episodes for 2025, You can look forward to topics such as social networking with your friends and freeholds on Facebook, running guerrilla LARPs in the talk pages on obscure Wikipedia articles, and using an active music visualizer as the base for a dreaming map in the VTT of your choice. We feel that Changeling in particular benefits from such strategies and the wackiest online hijinks that you can imagine, so do let us know what you come up with at our digital freehold, www.discord.me/ctp. You can also support our show via Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast and get a shout out at the end of each episode like the following netizens: Anarchist, Derek, Dorcadus, Elris, Eobol, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raskaboos, Sandshaker, Sija, Terry Robinson, Triceratops, and Victor Torre. Many electric thanks go to them. We also welcome reviews on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience, and feel free to tell random strangers on the internet about our show. Until next time, you are encouraged to go forth and seek online games. Best of luck, and keep on dreaming.